Okay, this is the Town Manager Act Review Committee. It is January 31st, 2024. We'll open the meeting by asking for an approval of the agenda. I'll accept motion.
So moved.
I was not present, so I don't
Okay,
think I
you
can.
abstain? All right, so it's majority vote. We have the minutes before us of the meeting of January 24th, 2024. I assume every member has had an opportunity to read it. And if so, I would accept a motion to accept the meeting minutes as submitted on January 24th, 2024.
Second.
Unanimous, majority action of the board. Okay, one of the first things we had on here was to discuss questions relative to public and department head input for the committee. We had talked about maybe submitting some questions and asking anyone that wanted to come before us with some latitude to address those questions. However, in the interest of time, Joe, as a courtesy, I'd like to move you up on the agenda and give you an opportunity.
Oh, I'm here till the end.
Okay, all right, so we'll stay with this. One of the considerations was that as people come to us, we want to create some parameters that they can address. And rather than have over redundancy and so forth, we'd like to get some structure. And we talked about possibly creating a more open type questionnaire that,
How about 3 questions?
well, we're talking about department heads and or the general public coming before us because we want to be open.
To the selectmen and to the town manager, they would be, if I thought, what works, what doesn't, what can be improved.
Yeah, this is the second time go around and there's still questions, so I think a question here like that, I think people should be able to ask those questions, because I think some of the issues they may have are all different than what, so, yeah, that's.
Steve?
The questions that I have are more aligned with how does this compare with, there are, I think, 69 towns in Massachusetts that have town managers. I think it would be, and maybe, I think you did this in 2008. Compare what we have for a act with what other towns have and see how they're different. Maybe there's something that we can learn from looking at, what another town has done in this area that would be of use.
Well, since 2008, when it was originally written, and to use the word carefully, I won't say plagiarism, but there was a lot of usage that came from the likeness of other towns and communities. And the intent was to create a stable structure to begin with. Obviously, the intent from that is to develop an ongoing process of adding and subtracting from the act and from input from citizens and department heads and town manager himself to find a way to develop this act. I'll keep calling it the act so that it represents what the needs of the town are. When it was written, it was 6 years ago, but there was a review. You were on that committee, and they had an opportunity to review it, and some of the recommendations went forward. I remember I was getting off the board at that time. It was just before I served my last term, and what the follow-ups were from the members of the Board of Selectmen after that, I honestly don't know. But I know not all the recommendations were taken in consideration. I would like to ask if you still have them, it would make sense to bring some of those forward that were recommended and were they acted on.
So
And maybe we revisit them.
Report, what the committee did last time was we issued a report. And that's what we provided to the selectmen, and all the recommendations that the committee made then are in that report. I can share that with the committee if you want.
I think it'd be, they went through that, and if it hasn't been enacted or put into the act, maybe it needs to be revisited.
Well, there were recommendations, I remember, whether or not they were followed or not, I know I don't have any idea. So.
Yeah. So I can share that. The last time we did this, there were some very specific concerns that were raised. This time, unless we hear differently from Joe. I don't know that there are very specific concerns. It's more of a
There
general.
was more personality of the prior town manager that had respectfully maybe offended certain citizens, and that seemed to be why maybe the entire process should be changed. So again, I think the town manager should have great insight for us from is actually working within the rules and regulations as to how this is going and maybe how he can be more effective.
Well, and so I agree. One of the things that so I spent like over 2 hours talking to John Brennan yesterday. He actually works, he did work before he retired in HR for Mass Gen for a long time. And one of the things he observed, being an outsider, which I thought was interesting, in his opinion, I mean, this act is really a job description for the town manager, pretty much. And what his observation was that there seems to be a tremendous emphasis in this act on HR, on human resources, which is sort of part of the town manager's responsibility, but it's not really his direct day-to-day job. It's delegated to a different person. So he thought that, he was wondering, well, why is that? Why is there so much emphasis in this document on that particular function as compared to the other things that the town manager is responsible for, public safety, public works, and all the other things. So that one area seems to have a tremendous amount of discussion in this, which perhaps that's why I thought it would be useful to see what other towns do and see if their act has a similar emphasis on HR.
I think it's how you look at it. If you look at the Town Manager Act, the town manager is responsible for creating the budget, all the finances of the town. The HR is a big function because obviously somebody has to manage the operations of the personnel. Town manager is responsible, all the department heads under the Board of Selectmen report to the town manager. That isn't necessarily HR because that involves, I'll use an example, Department of Public Works. Are the roads being plowed as they should? Is maintenance being done on the roads? Are the Parks Department people taking care of the parks? Then you have so many different facets. Yes, HR is big, but if you look at the act, there's a lot of other areas that are covered by it. And, and it does say in the act that the town manager and or his or her designee is responsible for the following, although it still goes to the top to the town manager. My belief has always been that you have a membership of the Board of Selectmen that for all intents and purposes are part-time. And you can't, and let me go back and say, I've been there. Alan's been there. I was DPW director for 6 months. That's crazy. So that's why the structure of this is so important. And I understand his position with HR, but I think the act is bigger than that.
I agree.
It's much bigger.
He was just,
Well, that's significant to
he
him.
was just pointing out that of all the things that the town manager seems to be responsible for, there seemed to be a lot of discussion about one thing, HR.
Well, again,
Now, I think I understand why that is, because when we reviewed this the last time, we didn't have an HR person. It was the town manager who was responsible for it. And as a result of that review, that function became acknowledged as something that we need to have in this town. So I think that's why it's there. The question is, I'm just curious to see what other towns act.
How about so who is the human resource person? I don't think the community knows. Who is it?
Sandy.
Okay. Respectfully, just by interest, Sandy actually was a classmate of mine at Northeastern. called criminal justice. But has she been trained? Has she gone to any programs?
Yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
so she certainly is qualified.
Can I put a cautious measure here?
Sure,
We're not measuring performance.
I understand that.
Yeah, and same with the town manager. He's gonna be here today, but it's not judging his performance. We all know, put it on the table, that we had a town manager that created conflict. Those days are gone. So we wanna stay with, you could have, no offense, you could have 4 new people in this act in the next 20 years. So managing as town manager. So the entity of town manager is who they are and not past or, yeah. And I just have to put that on the table. It's my job to say it, it's there. But I would make a recommendation, if you're comfortable with it, I would request, and I will get the information. I will pick 5 communities, similar demographics to Upton, that have a town manager, and get their town manager act for us to look at.
So let me ask you.
Would that
this
make
question.
sense?
Do all towns that have a town manager have a town manager act that they had to get passed?
Not necessarily, but many do. So for example, one of the towns I used to work in, Wayland, recently, last 18 months, filed this legislation that was approved creating town manager.
Okay.
I actually, as you were talking, I'm like, yeah, well, that town I knew from working there for 10 years. And I was curious how they addressed HR, because your point about it gets into very specifics. In examples I've seen, it will be generalities.
Yeah.
But not, like, we get into such specifics on appointment, that is an issue that needs to be looked at. But they may not all have acts. Some may have, a town charter. But Shrewsbury, it's an act that was approved through the legislature. Wayland, we could probably look at a bunch of others, and some of them, some of them, maybe through special act like we did, but I think they would still identify the broad powers of the position, the scope of authority very similarly, whether or not it's a legislative act versus.
So
a town
either-
charter.
Either you would have an act passed by the legislature, or you would have a charter that was voted on by the town.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if 5's a good number, we'll pull 5 and I will get them
Okay.
and make sure everybody has copies of them.
And the other thing too that goes along with it is, our act, to me, sounds like a job description. I don't know if that was the intention, but if you look at other acts from other towns, I'm just wondering if we also need to get the job description for the town manager as well. Because if they took a different approach in writing their town
Mhm.
manager act, we may be losing, if that's how we want to keep it, if we want to keep it to be like a job description for the town manager, then that's fine. It would then be helpful to compare it to other job descriptions for town managers in other towns,
Well,
whether that's with the act or.
respectfully, I think I'd first need to know why the way it's written isn't working.
I'm
And
not
just
saying,
do it to copy other towns because there are similar demographics. That's not a reason to do it. So that's why I think it's important to find out from the 3 selectmen and from our town manager, the current act, what input, if any, do they want with it? Otherwise, why change it? Just because some other town or somebody that works in a private sector in human resources
no,
thinks it should be changed?
no, I'm just,
What's it missing?
I don't know. That's my
So,
asking.
But if,
Can I just offer up an example of what it's missing? It doesn't specifically address the care and custody
of what?
buildings.
Mhm.
Makes no mention.
That's true.
Only and like efficient operations. So we've gone around it by having the board adopt policies on how to do certain things. Then there are always these use situations that don't fall in. So literally then I have to go to the board, hey, how do I interpret this in a policy? Is it allowed or not? Because you know what, this is a really gray area. And that takes time and lack of responsiveness. and sort of a lack of certainty. Community center, if that was only a library, the library trustees would be saying, this is ours.
Mhm.
But it is a community center and there's sort of like I work with seniors, work with library, just for us all to work together, but there's no ultimate responsibility. Basically it's the board of selectmen. So it's board of selectmen because it's by default, it's not really mentioned, and they were the ones that proposed the article for building. That's what I've heard.
So
So that's just an example of something that's absolutely silent.
but you're basically reinforcing what Alan just said. Let's look at this and find out what's missing. I agree with you. If we get 5 copies at random, just who knows what's in there. And if we get them and we find that 4 of the 5 are similar to ours, okay. If one is similar to ours and the other 4 are different, I think you'll find they're close to where we are because the legislature requires certain language and acts and so forth. And I remember when it went through legal, there was a lot of, but we can do that. And that will give us a chance to look at where we are, where others are. To your point, we don't necessarily have to change,
Right.
but it opens up our vision.
Yeah.
Gives us more insight into what's going on. Do we all agree? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got to be open-minded, really do. I agree with Alan. I just wouldn't want to take the town manager's word that everything's working right, because that's what I would expect. I would expect you to say, what isn't working right? And we all know there are some issues that have been addressed the last time, and they may have to be addressed again, but I think I'm interested in hearing what people have to say and what they, and not only the selectmen, but other committees that have dealings. And I don't know how clear, I mean, I've read it 2 or 3 times, how clear, when does the town manager interact with the selectmen? What rights do they have? Like you said, as the senior says, the building over there, when they get a complaint, when are they able to step in as a selectman? When can they approach the town manager with some type of official position? I'm not so sure that they have a lot of that, or you have to act on a question or a concern.
Oh, I disagree. If I'm not wrong, don't they take a vote and appoint the town manager? So I think that if there are performance issues that they perceive, they certainly have the right to speak with, they at a meeting, identify one person to speak with them about concerns they may have about his job performance.
No, I'm not talking about his.
I'll give you
performance.
another example with the community center. When we were still building it, the building was designed so that during Little League season, if there's a Little League game on a Sunday, when the building would normally be closed, it would be possible to have the front door of the library be unlocked so that parents and kids could use their bathrooms. We designed the building that way. Because before the building was built, there was a porta potty there. No one could ever cleaned it. It was disgusting. So we designed the building so that if it was if it was whoever makes the decision wanted to do that, it would be possible.
Okay,
So now who decides that?
Well, that's what discussion is.
Who
And
decides?
that's to me, a question that needs to be answered. He raised the issue. Who is responsible for management of the properties owned by the town of Buffalo? Right now, it sits only with the Board of Selectmen as executive authority. And or if it was, again, a library building, it would be the library. That would be it. So
There's one additional piece in that the DPW special act does state DPW also includes facilities and is responsible for facility maintenance. Right, yeah.
but
So like the issue Steve brought in front of the board, and they were the one that made the decision, no, we're not opening this up. There's too much liability for us. And that's after town meeting probably went through, and some people probably voted for the community center because they were gonna have public bathrooms.
you could name others, the Recreation Commission and the Ramsey Building. And the parks and the beach. Who is responsible for that? Is it the RecCom? I mean, they run the programs there. So there's a lot of questions to be asked relative to that. And if my way of thinking is that's a topic we need to discuss.
why would it be any different? When I was a selectman, we had a janitor here and he maintained this building. and there are other elected officials within the roof of this building. So why wouldn't that janitor now take over in cleanliness of it in the bathrooms or what have you? I don't know why it's any
So
different.
cleaning is one small
Facilities
part of the
management.
building. It's maintaining the equipment in the building, HVAC system, the lights. That building over there is very technologically advanced, much more so than this building. You know, there are no light switches, the light switches here, over there. When you walk into a room, the lights come on, and when you leave, they eventually shut off. When you walk into a room, there's a sensor in the ceiling that detects body heat, decides whether to turn on the heat or not. So it's much more complicated than this building. And so as a result, we need to have someone, fortunately, Dennis is extremely knowledgeable and all. He's learned how to run the building. And it's not just cleaning the bathrooms and sweeping the floors. It's maintaining the equipment in the building.
Well, the town of Upton no longer has two buildings. We
Right.
probably have 7 or 8 buildings. So the question now is facility manager. I don't know if that's us to put down or recommend, but the town has millions and millions of dollars in capital that needs to be maintained or it will deteriorate, simply put.
Yeah.
And to the days of, no offense, but to the days of having somebody do the custodial work, that's not addressing the issue.
Right.
I mean, there are things, what's your cost to heat? Are we wasting energy in this building because the thermostat systems haven't been adjusted in a long time or whatever? I'm making that up. But that's a side question. Yes.
If I may just add one other point, because I don't think we actually got to one of the questions you asked. In that, like, this is where as a policy junkie, because as being a town planner for 20 years, that's all I dealt with, policy besides overseeing projects. Identifying what then is written down within the scope versus the operation sometimes gets difficult to put down in the act versus, if a board member gets let's say Alan complained to Brett about something. It's incumbent on that member to say, you know what, I want to put this on the board's agenda. Let's have a discussion about this. Or come into my office to say, hey, I think we got a problem here. It's hard to identify what could be, say, an issue that really is a communication issue or a procedures issue that really doesn't need to be addressed by the act and really is a process. We have on our board of selectmen agendas an opportunity for board members to provide update. Really uses that time to provide an update. So we move on to the rest of the agenda. So I think there's some things where it's board members speaking up to raise issues. Because when you look at all of these things, I can't do it all. So that's why we have a finance director. That's why we have now a director of land use. That's why we have an elder and social services director to oversee those things that all fall within that town manager structure. And, it requires feedback from outside the community, inside the community, from board members to make it all work. And that, looking to see, and that's where once we identify maybe some of those areas for improvements or things to go on, I think Bob, you were saying, like then looking at some of these examples to see how did Wayland tackle that issue and what is the difference between maybe what is in an act versus what is really a procedure, best practice, standard operating procedure that really should be put in place.
Got your answer?
Yeah, no, I think some of this is vague, as you were saying, some of it just isn't a bottom line on something, who actually is like, I know you're responsible for human resources, but when does the second step in? When are they able to say, hey, this isn't working right here? Do you have to act? Is that in the act or is that just?
I'm sorry, I missed your question.
Well, if the selectman brought something to them, something to him and he didn't want to act on it, for whatever reason, it could be a selectman that's way out there in left field too, but when is he able to say no and what happens if he says no? Is that in your operation between the board of selectmen and the town manager, or is there a certain tripping letter that says.
That's gonna be tripped at the next annual evaluation.
Um,
So personally, I think the town manager, not this gentleman, but whoever is the town manager, has the right to fulfill his responsibilities, whatever his job description is. If the selectmen for some reason have an issue, I guess they would have a vote to request the presence of the town manager in a closed meeting and talk with him. And unless they felt it was something so significant, I think the town manager, whoever it is, has the right to run the town consistent with what the act gives him the authority for. And if for some reason the selectmen feel, God forbid, that individual needs to be removed because of whatever the issue, there's probably a process for that to occur. So I don't think the way it's written, as I understand it, the Board of Selectmen purposely wasn't given day-to-day responsibility for running this town for various concerns that maybe I do or I don't agree with, but that's what happened. And the selectmen theoretically, as I understand it, are supposed to look at the horizon and deal with issues, but day-to-day management happens to be the gentleman over there now with that title. That's how I understand it.
Well, I'll be honest about being biased, because I go back to a generation where the selectmen had all the responsibility. So you have to delegate it, and as this town gets bigger, the delegation needs to get broader, I guess. I'd like to, this is going into what he's gonna be discussing with us. So can we go back to the questions? Are we gonna make it as simple as Alan said and say to people, what works, what doesn't work, what do you want to see changed? Is it that simple? Because I don't think we should be putting words in people's mouth.
Right.
I think they should be able to come in with whatever their agenda is.
Yes, the simple, I think the simple questions would be fine. The question, the issue is, do we only ask those departments that report to the town manager for their input? Or do we ask everybody?
The community respectfully should also have
Yes,
a
I
night
agree.
that they can show up. It might be a 2-hour meeting, it might be a 2-minute meeting.
Right.
So how can you not include the community because they also interact
No,
with?
I didn't mean to not say, but like the library trustees, the board of assessors, the elected boards that do not report to the town manager, do we ask for their input?
Well, I think they could show, if you want to have a separate night, I'm fine to do that. Otherwise, they can show up, as a citizen
Okay.
if there's some issue, but nobody's going to be told, as far as I'm concerned, no, you can't say anything.
Oh,
But-
right.
But I would like to put one restriction on. I would like to put a timeline on their opportunity to come in. Because honestly, I don't want to sit here some night for an hour and a half of somebody hitting the same issues. I think if we put a respectful time and say, look, we're more than welcome to come. We would appreciate your concerns in writing, so we can all have copies of them. That's reasonable to
Well, can I get
expect.
clarity in what you just said?
What?
So when you say the same issues, if some other spokesperson has addressed that issue too, are you saying that the person
No.
that also feels that can't express it?
I'm saying a person, rather than sit here and repeat themselves, we say, okay, please submit it in writing. We're going to give you, say, 10 minutes, make your presentation. If we have questions we'd like to ask, we'll have dialogue. If we think it's important enough, we'd like to bring you back.
Well, you are the chairman and you can obviously control the discussion.
Yes, correct. And,
So,
but I want to put it on the table that no one's offended when I say, okay, we've covered that. Thank you
unless you
very
say
much.
ask nicely or say it nicely.
Well, sometimes I have a hard time being nice, Alan. So, but I think putting it open to everyone, and no one should be denied an opportunity to come and speak. But I still think it should be in writing so that when they leave, we have no interpretations. It's right in front of us.
I agree.
Reasonable? Yeah, reasonable. Okay.
How do we get input from residents?
I think one of the main things is being able to either publicize the time for public comment and to present it. Can I have general questions? We can easily get it out on the website, on social media. Coming to a board of selectmen meeting under public comment and saying we're inviting, as representing as the chair of the Town Manager Act, inviting the public to provide comments on the form of government, where to find this information. At least allowing for that opportunity, because I think we all know, being in town, 95% of the people don't even know we have a town manager form of government or what that means.
Yeah. I
So
would
as long
like,
as we do that, we can publish on the town's website. We're soliciting input from residents on this act. Here's a link where you can go read it. And the request that you make as chair is to submit your questions or comments in writing and come to a meeting and for future meetings, we can have public comment section and you can decide.
I would like to go further, and maybe I'm volunteering crazy, but I would like to offer them a time to be scheduled. What if when one night we get 30 people and another night we don't get any? And we're trying to respect everybody's time.
Well, I think as the chair, I think you can manage that. You can say, look, we can't.
Okay, we're in agreement? All right, I
think
just
it's
want to
gonna
make
be
sure.
Much more difficult to try to get a schedule, but
Okay, so we will, if we're all in agreement, we will go with the website that will have the requirements or the requests we have for them coming forward. The door is open. We're going to make that very clear. There is no restriction to any citizen in the town.
But I also recommend a sign out front, because not everybody
Mhm.
is capable, aware, or has access to internet. And more people probably drive by and would read it than would think to go on the website.
Okay.
That's why it was donated.
And that was, I got that message. So we all agree, it will be posted, people will be invited to come in, we'll ask for a written statement, basically. I don't want to put restrictions on people, but, I remember a town meeting, somebody got up and read a 55-page document that they wrote. So we asked it to be somewhat brief and factual. And
I think, again,
Again,
you're the
yeah.
chairperson.
Yeah,
You control
okay.
the meeting. If
I-
you want to,
I've
if you
done
want
that
to have a
before.
police officer here, that's fine.
I've had that too.
so the
You
three
might
questions,
remember a couple.
Alan, the three questions you wanted to ask were, what isn't
What
working?
works, what doesn't,
works? Okay,
and how do we improve it?
okay.
That's basic. That makes sense. Short and sweet. And that gives a lot of latitude as to anyone's. Okay, so we're in agreed on that. So moving along, town manager, Joe Layton, thank you. We appreciate you being here and your involvement. Again, his input is, and I've asked that it be basically factual. He's not here to say, well, my job, this or that. He's here to say the job can be done better by the following consideration. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so please, I open it up to you. Proceed.
So, thank you. So I think one of the main things that, and I do believe that all of this is, as the town has grown and, has operated over the last 10 years on a town manager form of government, some things that at least, may be worth reconsidering. And part of that is also associated with staff that reports to elected boards and town. And some of the conflicts that potentially can arise. So, for example, we have some that, and it's a really sort of low level example. Our compensation plan is based off of a annual review process. And employees are eligible for a merit increase upon the successful completion of a review process. That is rather hard to administer with some of the elected boards because there's basically the general exemptions that's the oversight of daily tasks within departments for elected board is exempt from the act. So one of the things our evaluation process does is it's just not rearward thinking, what do you accomplish this year, but also goal setting, identifying what's going to work, what employees are going to be work on, what are the main goals of the community, make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction. and setting goals and checking in over the course of the year, to make sure that those goals are achievable and that we're setting themselves up for success. I work really well with the staff that report to boards, but I don't have a role in that. So there's people in this boat that they don't have to necessarily row in the same direction. And from a coordination standpoint, I think that is something to be looked at. The scope, whether or not it's full review or to allow for some role, I think should be considered. Another thing, and this is where,
Could I answer? Be more specific. Are you saying in the instance of where, as an example, the Board of Assessors have agreed that the clerk for their department reports to the town manager for daily activity? that what you're
that could be an example on how to solve it.
Okay,
I'll use an example, for example, Board of Health is working within a regional consortium to bring on board a social services employee that's paid by a grant that is going to work in multiple communities. Now I know from good working relationship that I have with staff downstairs, we're going to make sure that that fits in nicely with the department that does fall under the town manager, the Elder and Social Services Department, so that we can find alignment, we can find synergies. But I have to do that through basically not courting, but sort of like, well, let's try to do this. I can provide recommendations, but if they want to go in a different direction that conflicts with that department, there's really no say that I have. It's a really simple, do I anticipate that there would be conflict or a problem? No, because we all worked well together. But that's an example where there's the potential.
but that's difficult for any form of resolution based upon the autonomy of the elected officials. And we could name many of them, but they are elected to perform for their department. And
But
that,
it's the staff that is going to be overseeing those tasks.
Here's the problem. So we have elected boards, and elected boards sometimes have to hire staff, town employees, and those employees report to the elected board.
correct.
And so we have some employees that report to the town manager and some employees that don't.
Exactly right.
And the question is, why? Would it make more sense to have an elected board? They can choose to hire whoever they want if that's part of their mission, their charge. But ultimately, wouldn't it make more sense for all town employees, regardless of where they work in the town, to report to one person?
My opinion, no.
Why?
If this, because the citizens elect people who they perceive to be competent and capable. And those elected officials should have whoever works in their department, in my world, report to them.
Okay.
That's simple.
But so now, so how do we then, in that, doing what you said, which is the way it works now, how do we make sure that all town employees are treated the same way with regard to?
You have a human resource person who's
Yeah.
responsible for all employees of the town. Doesn't matter. There's no delineation. Only certain departments' employees report to that person.
But the performance of the job is not,
How is that judged?
yeah, it's judged separately.
Different.
One by a town manager, the other by an elected board. And I think what Steve's saying is that creates a bit of a dichotomy there.
And how do they determine compensation? We have a personnel board. Is the personnel board responsible for all the town employees or only those that report to the town manager?
Well,
I
it's
think
pretty
when the
clear.
citizens, when the citizens have an appointed board, in my world, that board should be responsible for whoever works for them, identifying the salary need, coming to the town annual meeting and identifying what they need for an increase to pay that person.
Yeah.
And if anyone feels they're not being treated appropriately, then they would go to the personnel manager and that person would have had input for all employees.
So we have a point of contact for all employees, even those that are appointed by, hired by boards, only for HR, but not for.
You know, it would help me to understand your reasoning. Obviously, we're not going to say names, but it would be helpful if you can give me general instances of where this has been an issue that you feel the way that it's been done, at least in my memory,
I
is
don't-
somehow not working.
I don't know. I don't know if there's an issue.
I can. There was an instance where years ago, the salaries were set for certain personnel boards set standard levels. Each position has a level and there was standard, and an elected official get up on the town meeting floor and argued for their employee, and that employee ended up making 20% more than all the other people in that level standing, simply because that person got up and argued for it, and the voters then went, okay. And so the morale, that affected morale to say the least, because everybody that was at, like, say, step category 3 goes, wait a minute, I'm doing the same thing and this person's now making, that's where.
Well, the citizens had the ultimate vote, right?
I know that,
83%.
but we also know that 65 people show up at the town meeting and there's 5,000 votes. I know that, but it's our job to try and create as much equity as possible.
Certain things should be standardized, and the board should have to follow a certain standard for hiring practice, discipline practice. The board should, the Board of Health shouldn't set their discipline standards by themselves. There should be a standard for the whole town that they all have to meet, whether it's hiring, however it's done. And after that, then the board takes over. But I don't think they should be able to hire anybody, or discipline policy should be equal, fair and equal to everybody in the discipline. The town of Upton has a compensation plan and a
Classification plan.
classification plan. I mean, they have to follow all that. I don't think the board can go and change a job description, can it? That has to.
No, that has to go to the personnel board.
Right.
So I can, and again, like, within the structure we have, I've navigated this, because an example was, with the land use department up here. You have staff reporting to the planning board, elected, and you have staff supporting to appointed boards like the ZBA, and you have building officials in conservation who's appointed by the board of selectmen as well. But with finite resources, we can't hire and fill positions at a quarter of a full-time equivalent and a quarter here. Sort of Denise filled that, but we sort of added and filled up her position. But when we had all the staffing changes, it's like all the cards got thrown in the air and had to sort of make some sense out of it. So I reorganized the land use departments, but I had to basically go to every single land use department board and say, this is what I'm proposing. And with the planning board, it was really challenging because, of course, they're like, well, we're elected, we have our own budget. They went along and, now, we have Mike. They went along, they did say, look, if things don't work out, we're going to take our money and we'll go hire our own person. But things have worked out. It's now been 18 months. That's an example where, yeah, it works well. We can still operate. It's not creating a challenge that is able to be achieved. But it does represent a what can potentially be a hurdle depending on the receptibility of that elected board when, trying to look at an organization as a whole. I just point that as something that has its potential, because it can work for 15 years straight until it doesn't. And that may only be one instance, and then it works for 15 years again.
So if two town boards identified a part-time position, that they wanted, they couldn't share the same person because they're two different hiring entities. Whereas if all the employees were hired by one person, or reported to one person can say, okay, you have a need for a half-time person here. This other board has a need for we can hire one person and we can share them. And the boards can dictate what they do for their part of the time, but it's only one person that we're hiring instead of two separate people. It just seems like having the boards be responsible for employees. I don't know. It just seems odd.
It's funny then, although I'm gonna reference a city. The city of Boston, the mayor has authority for certain departments, and then there's elected officials. Let's say the school board.
Yeah.
That gets to hire who's gonna run the school. And I don't know that there's been any problem with it. Again, I'm open to whatever the discussion's gonna be, but my initial position is that the community and elect certain individuals, and they're separate from the selectmen and the town, they don't report to the town manager. There can be a consistent employee, what is expected of employees. But again, the human resource person, personnel, that person, if there are issues, those people would go to that person. And I think that the boards that are elected by these citizens, unless you're going to take away the citizens electing them and make either the town manager position theoretically appoint ahead of that, I don't see how you have the authority to do that.
I don't know. I'm just asking the question. I'm not,
So I'm just expressing an
yeah,
opinion.
right. And that's, I'm just,
There,
I'm not saying we should take away any authority from the boards that are elected. All I'm saying is, would it make more sense to have all town employees follow the same set of procedures, the same set of rules, be evaluated the
Who
same
says they're
way?
not?
Well, if, the example Bob gave,
there are
Let me just please, if there's an elected board that feels that a particular member of theirs, even if it's a grade, should get paid more, and the citizens agree to it, and they voted at the annual town meeting to increase the salary, then I think that's what a town, as opposed to a mayoral system, is all about. So maybe, again, I don't know, maybe those other people at grade level 3, maybe for whatever reason, whoever they report to didn't feel that they should get the raise. It's the citizens who ultimately decided.
right. But what isn't known to the citizens when you make that vote is what the impact is going to be to other employees. So you give
Well,
one
then somebody
person,
should have, in my world, somebody should have stood up and said, this might be inconsistent.
yeah,
And the people who care enough and show up here for that meeting then decide. I've lived in this town since 1986 and 1987. That's the way it's always been. You say 60. Normally it's 80 to about 100 people who show up for the annual town meeting. In the special meetings, it's even less. Most people respectfully are comfortable putting their kepi on the pillow, waking up in the morning, driving out of the community and coming back, and they don't involve themselves in government unless it's a school issue or, something about some 40B being built in their street or their area.
we understand.
That's what this is.
Maybe there's a middle of the road, and I'm just throwing this out there. The elected authority gives them the entitlement to hire whom they want. But don't you think it's fair that once that person is a employee of the town, they abide by all the other regulations here in the personnel bylaw? And that includes evaluations, compensation. I'll throw it out there. I've known in the past, there are people that work for elected departments that never get evaluated. And basically their boss is gone all day. There's nobody here. They're here on their own.
The only thing, from a processing standpoint, the only thing that HR needs is a letter from that elected board saying, we gave them a satisfactory, review and get their merit increase. That's all so we don't know what was done. We just know that they approved getting a merit increase.
Yeah.
And, and actually working for Wayland, I actually was reviewed by both. I was appointed and hired by the planning board. policy direction from the planning board, day-to-day operations by the town administrator, and the town administrator and the planning board both did my annual review. There are middle grounds to find for reinforcing policies because there's always the potential. And one of the potentials I have is more when it comes to something bad has happened. We have had this, not going to specifics, where we had to take disciplinary action against a employee under an elected board, but the board didn't really understand the consequences and delayed things that could have put the town at risk. So there should be, when we look at this, there can be language that says, working with the HR department or something to implement. And it doesn't need to be all one way or the other. Something in the middle that shows some sort of dual role so that the elected board doesn't feel they're having things taken away, but for some employees of elected boards, I see them much more than they're a majority or a quorum of that board ever see their employee. And I see the interactions. I hear from the public. I hear from department heads.
Let me ask a question. What if there was I don't know what it is, this, what if there was an employee that was appointed and hired by an elected board that isn't busy full time, has extra time? Are you allowed to ask that person to do other things?
I don't believe
Of course
so.
not.
No.
So here's a situation where a board hires a person, expects them to work 40 hours a week, they're not, and we can't take advantage of that for whatever reason.
Well, they don't come in.
Huh?
Or they don't come in.
Well,
Or
if
they
they
don't
don't
I
come
guess
in.
we're on the same page.
If they don't come in, then it's the elected officials who should speak to the community and, that way. We have a form of government that the citizens elect certain departments of people to run certain departments.
I
And
understand.
until, I know you do, and until that's changed, I don't see how anyone who wasn't voted onto that, let's say the Board of Health or whoever it is, the assessors, whatever it is, I don't know how the town manager or anybody else can question how they're running their department. If it's not going well, the citizens remove them then at the next election or do a recall and get rid of them if they're poor managers.
You said two things. You said until it's changed, and government constantly has amendments and enacts changes to legislation and laws. So that door is open. It doesn't mean it's taboo. It's open. Dick, you were gonna say something?
There's an accountability here too, and it is, the town manager pointed out, they had an issue with an employee where they have to step in. They may not have jurisdiction, but I don't think that the board that may not come here from week to week, but they have an employee here, there should be a town code of conduct. There should be a town dress code for here, those things like that. I don't think any of that would be the Board of Health's responsibility. I mean, putting them to work and having them do the job, et cetera. But some of those issues you can get, again, what if it's 20 hours a week and he doesn't show up here for 2 days and he's not accountable to anybody, right? The employee?
Well, I think if you're talking about an elected board, that person is accountable to them.
But somebody's got to call them and say, hey, your person's not here. I know I'm taking it to the far extreme, but that does happen. Believe me, it does happen.
So another example is, employees who are hired by other boards use town computers to do their work. We may institute a policy that says all people using town computers have to go through specific training on cybersecurity stuff and all this other stuff. What if the board says, no, we don't have time for that?
How are you going to change this practice that I think has been in effect for elected boards to hire who they want and to compensate them what they want? And you've just indicated it was an example where maybe it was the Board of Health went forward and asked for their employee to get more, and it wasn't fair to the others. And I think you're really talking about changing more of the current government in giving all responsibilities, getting rid of those elected officials, because I think when they get elected, they have the right to run their offices they want. And maybe you're talking about something so much more significant than just looking at the town manager act.
I'll give you the best example.
Okay,
The Board of Selectmen is elected by the majority of the people in town. Whoever the majority rules, they're elected. They used to run this town, and the town said it's not working because during the day, there's nobody here. So we formed the Town Manager Act. We changed the authority of the executive elected board of the town of Upton. And you're arguing we can't change the authority of an elected board?
well,
We
I'm
did it
saying
for
I
the
think
selectmen.
you have to get rid of that they're elected, because I think they
No,
have
we
the
didn't get rid
authority.
of the selectmen.
I won't be redundant, but what I am saying, Bob, is that if there's an elected board, I think they get to choose who's gonna work in their office, not the Board of Selectmen, not the town manager. And they get to identify what their expectations are for that person. If anybody in the town doesn't like that and feels that somehow they're doing a disservice to the town, then do a recall. That's the way our government, as I understand it, works right now. If you want to make more change to elected offices, get rid of the elected offices then and have a broad power for the town manager. Good luck with that.
Did we get rid, did
can't
we
we
get
have an
rid of,
elect-
excuse me, did we get rid of the Board of
I
Selectmen?
love being a contrarian.
Did we get rid, and you said Kepi, and I have to quote you, did we get rid of the Board of Selectmen when we enacted the Town Manager Act? No,
I have two answers to that.
no, but we didn't. We changed
You
it
lessen,
so
you
that
lessen
their
their
department-
authority. You lessen their authority because they theoretically don't run day-to-day operations, now, as I understand it. They're supposed to look into the future. That's what was the result of what happened.
and they don't run day-to-day authority, and we have elected boards that don't run day-to-day authority. So why can't we do it for them if we did it for the Board of Selectmen, the executive office of the town? We changed the structure of this government to say the executive offices of this town are unable, due to the part-time nature, manage the town day-to-day activities. So we changed it. Why can't we change it for another elected board and say their personnel shall to make accountability? I mean,
Honestly, I guess because the citizens should have a vote in that.
well, they would.
I'm not saying you can't, but right now, in my opinion, you don't have the authority to tell an elected board who to work for them or what they think,
No, but so-
what they think somebody who reports to them should get paid, especially when the citizens then vote for the raise for that person.
But I'm not suggesting that we take away the authority of the board to hire whoever they want. I'm just saying, once they're hired, they should report to the same person that the person sitting next to them is, that may work for,
We have a difference of opinion.
Okay,
That's all this is.
can the chair say we're getting redundant? Is that fair to
And
say?
I said I didn't want to
Okay.
get to that.
My
Oh.
question is, where does the complaint go? When somebody's got a complaint against an employee, where does it go?
It goes
What's
to
the
the,
complaint?
I don't care, whatever.
it goes to the elected authority of that person.
You don't
If
think
they're
somebody
not,
picks the phone up and calls one of the selectmen because that's who they believe that they.
oh,
is
yeah,
their right?
then they're done,
And
yeah.
then it's up to the selectmen to say, hey, call the Board of Health, I've got nothing to do with it.
Yes.
And you know what the citizens say?
Yeah.
Oh, you're the selectman, don't tell me you don't have anything to do with this.
Where should the selectmen step in now? Let's say an employee gets in an employee, say he's out doing inspection, and gets.
How about the Board of Selectmen invite that board to a meeting? And, hopefully they'll show up. I mean, honestly, just off the cuff, I don't mean anything by this.
Yeah.
I remember many times as a selectman that myself and the other two selectmen asked the Board of Engineers to show up and meet with us. And no lie, 2-3 times, people that we appointed didn't come before us.
Not me.
I didn't say this to you, but there was dysfunction, okay? So my opinion is, it's an elected entity, they have their own employees, and they're the ones to judge. If you don't like their decisions, remove them and get somebody else in there, or change their authority that I think has been for decades.
In
It's
the,
not since the beginning of this community who voted for people like
in the
that.
instance of interest of time, we'll table this, but I would ask each member to prepare to debate this again. Let's let this sink in a little and come back to address it. Because it's, obviously, there's a passionate debate on it, and I think it
You
needs
don't
to
have to
be.
agree on everything, Bob.
No,
I'm not
no.
gonna change my
Well,
opinion. I'm not gonna say anything different.
Alan, God forbid we all agree, then we're not doing our job, okay? So,
That's what I'm hearing.
and yeah, okay. So if we could move on, I'll go back to the town manager and you have the floor.
So another item is, and it falls under section 4, it's the appointment process. The way that I read it is that for departments that fall under the jurisdiction of the town manager. If we go to fill a position, I have to notify the board and they have 15 days to consider that. And they may waive that 15 days, but it needs to be done at an open meeting. If they deny that appointment, they have to do that in writing. I'm sorry, they have to provide a reason. That's that's the words that are on the page. Prior to my getting here, there was an established practice, I won't say policy, we didn't down, where town manager would say, I want to appoint this person, here's the let's say it's a police officer. Here's a letter of recommendation from the police chief. He recommends appointment. I want to appoint. Please let me know by this date whether or not you want to waive it or not. For the most part, it's because people have full confidence in the police chief, knowing that he is subject matter expert. They just waive it by way, or they had waived it by an email. There was no open session where it was discussed. So that's for one level of employee. You have another, let's say it's a department head, where do we treat that appointment differently than a police officer? Do we have different grades of appointment? I'm personally, because for my whole career, I was a department head, even if it was a department of one, still a department head. I always had my appointments ratified by a board of selectmen, whether it's a town administrator or town manager or form of government. And I always went to talk and say, and just introduce myself. The board may have asked softball questions because they know I already went through 3 or 4, actually for the town of Weston, 5 interviews. Probably still a little bit with that one. And I was the town planner and went, so it's like I was successful, but there was a long, lengthy process. But should department head positions be a different category and treated differently than, say, a department specialist or even a part-time? It doesn't differentiate between full-time or part-time. This person could be working 10 hours a week. So this is a section I think should be clarified and simplified, because to wait a couple weeks for a board of selectmen meeting can actually have an impact on providing an offer. And you're going to see it in an agenda. The candidate that I'm bringing forward to appoint as the next director of Elder and Social Services, I'm putting them on the agenda for Tuesday night. I already made sure she knew, hey, I want you to come in, introduce yourself, and the board may ask some questions. Because I don't want to sort of go by that past policy or practice of email to then get all these questions. It's like, if I'm hiring a department head and they're going to have a public facing role, they should absolutely be comfortable coming in front of the board, talking about themselves and talking to the community.
So if your question is, if there's a real urgent need, is that what you're saying?
Do we treat different classifications?
I would
of
say
employees differently?
What system, which I'm familiar with, you generally have to give 10 days notice for a motion if you're mailing it, or 7 days if it's in hand. However, you can do an emergency motion and come in literally that day if there's a true emergency and the judge agrees that there is. So yes, I think that there should be a writing that identifies what might constitute an urgent or an emergency meeting required because of the posting or what have you. So honestly, I can imagine other towns must have something like that. And I think Copeland and Page still is the town attorney, so I would honestly present that to them. What legally is appropriate and how do we do it?
I think
I
your
think
question,
it'll come down to really what does the town want to say? I've never had a administrative assistant within a department go before board of selectmen for appointment. Never had it.
Is that-
Police officers sometimes are odd depending on the community because they want, they want to have that welcoming, they want that appointment ceremony. That's my last town.
Whose choice is that, to not have an administrative person come before the board versus? Is that
Well, my last town identified, a strata of departments that then did require confirmation and ones that didn't. Administrative support positions did not require, board.
So that was part of the
Right.
policy?
It was, yep, exactly. So a, part-time conservation agent never went in front of the board of selectmen for appointment. The full-time conservation agent who was the department head, absolutely.
so what you're saying, to recap, is could the language be changed so that, say, a part-time employee, a full-time administrative employee does not require the 14 days by the Board of Selectmen, but the department head does? So that structure above a certain level,
Yep.
you want to be able to say, because in some cases, to hire a clerical person and still need the Board of Selectmen's 14 days, yes or no, is kind of restrictive. Is that what you're saying?
3 levels of review and, the department has identified the candidate that they figure fits within not only their needs, looking at expertise, but also within their department.
So in the hiring process, there is a procedure that allows to be vetted, and that be the personnel board's involvement.
Yep.
And so HR,
Yep.
you, so it does go through a process regardless of the level. You're just saying department head, and what that's classified as is hard to define maybe, but somebody above this pay grade scale or this scale.
And that's where actually with the compensation, the classification plan, we're able to say anyone above a step 8 falls into this. You can identify that board of selectmen shall establish policies or a policy on implementation of this. But having something that differentiates them, I think is beneficial, because having a part-time person at, which then sometimes it's like, we want to get this person in as soon as possible. That takes time. You have a department head, they're usually transitioning from another town. That then takes 30 days. At that point, there's no problem with them being appointed by a board of selectmen, because we still need that transition period.
So honestly, I would probably follow what you advise us is the most efficient and effective way to get the hire as quickly as it's needed. So I would rely on, personally, I'd rely on what you think is the best process.
So again, we'll discuss this later, but above a certain pay grade, and what grade would that be?
I just use that as an
Okay.
example, but we can.
Above a certain pay grade requires the 14-day period, below that, and take out, if you hire a
Basically
part-time
say-
person, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. and a part-time person.
So to bring it back, if the town manager act is going to be modified, I assume it would be approved on a vote with the citizens. So if the citizens
Yeah.
decide that, I think then that's your argument why, let's just say the Board of Health, although we didn't really mean the Board of Health there, their employees would have to follow what now are the regulations. And I think, right,
Any change we make is going to the voters.
Yeah.
giving the town manager more authority, more delineated authority over the employees.
But in this example that Joe just mentioned, it wouldn't apply to an elected board.
No.
It only apply to the boards that report to the
The
town.
Well, unless you're gonna change it, what I'm saying, the way it is now, I don't think that you can do that if you, because again, they report not to the town manager. They report to an elected official who the community has giving their faith
Yeah.
that they're gonna do the right thing.
Yeah.
So maybe it needs to be changed exactly who employees in town report to. And it would be to the position of town manager.
So let me ask you this question. Is there a department that reports to an elected board that would hire a a person at the department? Recreation.
Yep.
So
The library.
is the
Library, well, yep.
so for the library trustees and for the RecCom, if they wanted to hire a department manager level person, would they have to get approval from the board of selectmen?
No,
It's the DPW director, the fire chief, the police chief.
yeah,
Probably those are the primary ones
Yeah.
with.
And,
with a-
COA director.
Elder services.
And so, all right, so I think your message is clear. Take out the small stuff where your process is delayed trying to hire people. So you create more bureaucracy with the board of selectmen, and let's face it, 99% of the time you're hiring somebody at a certain level, they go, okay, and they don't take any action or they take the action. And it is clear that if they don't act in 14 days, it happens anyway. So, yeah. Okay,
So another item is actually within that same section, and it deals with discipline. So push aside collective bargaining, because that's a whole different animal
Yep.
dealing with discipline, I think. So upon approval, upon appeal by a town officer or employee not subject to collective bargaining or other, within 2 days of action taken by a town manager to discipline or remove such officer or employee, the board may, but need not meet within 15 days to consider appeal. So we talk about how then the board has to, the board of selectmen has to have a role in disciplinary action. Now, looking back at this time, I can make the assumption disciplinary action is more of the demotion type thing, suspension, termination. But we now have also a personnel procedures manual that identifies a policy of progressive discipline. First item, and it says this is a disciplinary action, is a verbal counseling. Does that mean I have to seek board support for, and I use this as an example, I think with Bob saying, you know, like, Bob, I've noticed you've been coming in late 5 days in a row now, or every other Monday. Look, I'm a little concerned, you know, one, you know, it is something I want to make sure that everything's all fine, but I want to remind you, this is the policy and, you know, this is our expectation. That verbal counseling is the first thing that's identified as progressive discipline. If I was dealing with unions, it would be a totally different thing. But if this was just a non-union employee, that I am taking disciplinary action because I am writing something to file saying on such and such a date, I talked to this person, this is what I observed, because if in a year things don't improve and we have to keep progressing, I need to then follow up like, look, I told you in a written letter, we had this conversation on this date. You explained this is what you were going to do. I'm still seeing the same issues going on. We need to provide a written warning. How it treats discipline in this section 4 makes it seem to me that any sort of action, the board needs to approve that action within a certain period of time. So it's not an issue that's popped up, but in looking through the act and seeing potential conflicts and looking at personnel policies, I can see that happening.
the town personnel policies manual states under disciplinary action defined, the town manager or other appointing authority, department head or supervisor observing the action of employee warranting discipline action, counsel the employee. Such counseling shall be presented in a manner minimizing embarrassment to the employee. So it says the town manager shall. Then it says, any employee discharge shall be provided meeting with the town manager on the matter, town manager. It says, when the appointing authority is not the town manager and the employee is still not satisfied, the employee may appeal to the town manager. Even though it says not the town, for disciplinary action, the town manager may then overturn the disciplinary action, reduce the action imposed, and increase the action to including discharge. So that gives the town manager a lot of authority. I'm a little confused on what you're saying. Are you saying
It's the board. I don't have the authority.
in the town manager act, but the personnel laws conflict with it?
Exactly.
Got it.
What
Okay.
section of section 4 is that?
Roman numeral, lowercase Roman numeral 2. Starts upon appeal. So section A is for a Roman.
What happens if it gets more serious and you have to have a hearing with them? Is that you or is that the board?
It ends up being me. But then, that's where, the board may approve. One, that goes without saying, any HR issue, we're talking to town council, make sure, one, they're updated. Two, they know what we're doing so that if for, out of any chance of making a misstep, we can coordinate and not then be trying to repair a situation. So, but because it says the board may approve or disapprove the town manager's action within said 15 days and state the reasons why, there's that part that really isn't recognized within this, the personnel procedures manual. At the same time, the differentiation of what the range is for discipline, I don't think is really referenced within this section.
What happens with the unions?
Very often unions will have their own language as far as complaints, grievances, and all this stuff. So I am the grievance hearing officer under this, but then also within the union contracts.
So,
Very often the discipline is being done by the department head.
Right.
Not me. So DPW would end up taking disciplinary action against an employee, and then I'm more in that hearing process.
the reason I asked that, I picked up the paper the other day, what's going on in Hopkinton, and, you know, the Board of Selectmen are right in the middle of that hearing. The hearing is with the Board of Selectmen, not with an individual.
Yeah.
The determination of a 20-year employee.
Town meeting showed up for it.
Huh?
And the people showed up for it. That's unique, yeah. So again, your position is the conflict between the personnel bylaws and the town manager act.
As it relates to clear lines of operations.
Mhm.
Another real basic thing, and this is thankfully the last one out of HR related, is authorization of contracts up to 25,000. Back in 2008, and I just think it should be 50.
Could you give an example of what might be a contract that you'd enter into?
There was a contract for services, for, facilities that was 27,000. I mean, put it in front of the board of selectmen, they approved it, they didn't have any issues. It's just, I go to them for a lot because now very few contracts are under 25,000.
And 25,000 goes back
Good enough.
Yes,
8, 10
It all falls 30B.
yep.
How does it fall 30B?
It basically says, I'm the, later on, it says I'm the procurement officer, which then legally I have to follow 30B, chapter 149, any of those laws. I am MCPPO certified, as is Dennis. We're the only two in town, that are, approved procurement officers.
So you're asking to go to 50? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Could we
And
get,
again, it doesn't, if it's something the board says, no, we want to see it, it's fine. It's just from an operation standpoint, it then just means I'm delaying things by a week, week and a half because of how things may fall.
I guess the question that would be asked from, say, the general public is, how many contracts have you signed in the last, say, 6 months? What are the ranges that you've signed them for? In other words, are the majority of them in the 20s or Is it now that most of them are in the 50s?
Majority are over 50. I'm talking about smaller service contracts, planning contracts that then are in the 25 to 30, 35 range. I'll be, if town meeting approves, an example is, contract for installing speed signs. We got funding for 27,000 at town meeting. That contract will have to come in front of the board of selectmen for approval for something town meeting is already authorized. It's mainly maintenance contracts. Those are usually, unless it's only a single year, if you have a 3-year contract, you're talking about then anything that is, 8,333 for 3 years, then triggers that 25,000. So it's those multi-year contracts that then will more trigger that, even though the annual is really less.
What was the approved budget for the town last year?
28 million, 200 and something.
That's it. I thought it was more. So does it need to be a limitation on whether it's 50, 75,000, whatever you can individually make a decision to pay for something? I don't know.
So there's 2 things with the contracts. One, finance director has to sign off that funds are available. So that very often is an appropriation that is done at town meeting. So we're basically just executing that contract.
But that doesn't really answer whether or not the funds should be used for that purpose, just that the funds are available, right?
Right. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying is, well, how do we know the town manager just isn't doing all these different contracts? Contracts are very often supporting the work of departments or facilities. For those things, we need, for example, I'll be signing a contract. It'll only be 7,000 because it's a contract for annual maintenance for our generators. We have to have these in place for operation of the buildings. Any sort of, contract needs to follow those procurement laws. I think in my talking, I sort of got away from ultimately the question that you were asking as far as appropriate, probably.
Well, whatever, whether it's 50, 75,000, $10, the town manager has the authority to cut a check to resolve it. I'm thinking, for example, on a claim maybe against the town, I don't know to what extent we are self-insured currently, or, we handle above a certain sum or something like that. So the town manager, and I do think you should have that authority, or the person in your position should. I'm just curious what my question was.
Quite honestly, because this was execution of contracts, and I was thinking it's really more on procurement. I hadn't thought as far as if there was a legal settlement. The challenge is, let's say there was a personnel issue that was a settlement. There's very often conditions that both parties are also signing, and very often boards of selectmen are included on that because there's a larger liability, and it's more than just a dollar amount. There's other provisions that are in place.
Well, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just a number and that's it.
Well,
Yeah.
that could be resolved by putting the comment in there excluding any contractual requirement as a result of,
Yeah.
and just.
Well, I mean, that's where I'm trying to think of like a good example that would not involve a legal case that would be in front of the board for executive session. Because, Alan, say you work for me and you said, look, you didn't approve my vacation days. I'm filing suit unless you write a check for $10,000. One, the finance director would go ballistic seeing that come through because he'd be looking for supportive information. And without some sort of legal documentation, there wouldn't be the support or approving a claim uniformly without town council being involved and the board being involved. I think that the
But
checks and balances.
if it involved a payment, and I am aware of one, I don't know how many years ago, let's say 7 or 8 years ago, where a position, even though it was elected, was dissolved and there was a payment made. So that might have fallen within the amount, whether it's $50,000 or 75,000, whatever it's going to be, that we're going to suggest that the town manager have the authority for, could have just signed off. There would have been a release. I agree with you, but I'm just trying to get a grasp of what authority the town manager would have to do that. I'm not.
Yeah, if that, not knowing any of the details, I don't know a
I,
mechanism on how.
I find it, I can't think of an instance where there would be a procedure where there's a legal settlement on any terms where it wouldn't involve council and the board of selectmen. I can't think of any, because the nature of, I mean, it becomes legal, this board of selectmen with town council
Well,
need to address it. So,
except if you interpret the way it's written now, that the town manager is responsible for the day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
And theoretically, the selectmen are looking on the horizon. The town manager would be resolving, he would have, in my opinion, or she would have, in my opinion, the authority. Of course, they hopefully would speak with town council and resolve it, perhaps for a sum that the town manager feels is responsible.
So maybe some of this is also on the structure. So,
Goods and services.
right, exactly. So I've seen examples in other towns where it establishes better categories for some of these things. And right under this authority is then serve as chief procurement officer. If that was actually merged together, then my argument would be, this is specifically only as a procurement officer executing contracts for goods and services.
Okay.
And quite honestly, that's the, I'm really,
I think he's something.
I think the other issue is you gotta check and balance too. One of the things that was just your signature, but with the finance person, I think there's a check and balance.
oh yeah.
Maybe I've seen it, you need the check and balance.
No, and not only that, it's, we require on our contracts, we identify the account that money is coming out of.
Right, but all that does, the finance person doesn't say whether or not the judgment of the town
Says the
manager is
money's there.
appropriate. It just says money is there, so no disrespect, big deal.
Yeah, yes and no. Within procurement law, the finance director, town accountant has a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that in authorizing that funds are accessible, that to the best of their knowledge, they follow, that the procurement officer has followed appropriate standards.
I don't think that changes what I've just said, though. The town manager would have the authority to settle, I think, anything unless there are restrictions in the, what the funds are to be used for. And it could be, I'm just saying a legal matter because it comes to my mind, and I'm aware of one situation where something was resolved. So that's.
Well, it's clarified. You just state goods and services. Boom. Takes out any legal. Simply, and goods and services are basically budgeted ahead of time. It's salt, road salt, heating oil.
Or a specific article.
Those are all either voted at town meeting or the part of the budgetary process. The money's already there. It's just the process of contracting for that material.
Would the selectmen see that at a meeting that you signed a contract, you signed a contract for $48,000 for HVAC maintenance for all town? Would they see that? Would they know that?
Oh, yeah. So I don't know to what extent any of you have seen, since I got here. I've prepared board selectmen packets, including the motion and board information, so that they get a copy of the contract. They can review it.
That's what I thought.
So.
Next.
I already talked about the whole buildings. Those are actually, believe it or not, those are the main issues when I look at it that I experience. I think there's some maybe some organizational things that can happen. It does just list everything out. Section 4 is like this long. And for readability, to divide it into personnel, procurement, buildings, finances might help it read a little bit better. But at the same time, then having to then, okay, let's state
Go back to the
regions,
state.
here's all the changes that we made.
And the more you make, the longer it's gonna sit in Boston.
Exactly.
Yep.
As is, once the AG's office approves the official vote of town meeting to change Board of Selectmen to Select Board, gonna have to prepare the legislation for David Moradian to then, file. And that's probably gonna sit on legislators' desk for a good 6-9 months. And that's just
Yep.
search and replace.
Procedural, yeah. Okay. Go.
Yeah, I'm good.
Change the form, you could certainly change the formatting in here to, so it would be better understood, you know.
Well,
Less legalese, more plain language, is that what you mean?
Well, maybe different headers, I don't know. some
Well-
headers or something.
well, let's be candid here. This was written in 2008. And, a lot has happened since that time.
Yeah,
A lot. So we're pushing on 16 years. So, and it's had a few amendments to it, but certainly it could be, I would caution in going crazy on how you rewrite it though, because to your point, the more you rewrite it, the longer the legislature's gonna have it. And they'll probably, if you revamp this whole process, it will go through the whole process again. You might be over a year before you get it back. But I don't have a problem with it. I mean, it is what it is. So if we follow our agenda, thank you, Joe, by the way. We were going to talk about sections 1 and 2 and just look at that. And this brings in the question, the headings. I mean, 1 and 2 are pretty much definitions. All they do is define what the act covers. And I just wanted to see if anyone had any comments or,
Well, should we change Board of Selectmen to Select Board?
well, it hasn't happened yet, but it would be
The
another.
authorization is happening at town meeting, so once the AG's office approves that action of town meeting, then we will be filing the legislation to change these.
So we should change it here.
If you're working on a Word document that then has these changes, I don't see any issue with making that change.
Okay.
Because within the general bylaw, that will be immediate. Once we get approval, we'll send it off to general code to make those changes. Any sort of,
What will be the term? Select persons?
Select board.
Select Board. The other change I think we ought to make as a general change is we only use the male pronoun and when referring to the town manager. And that was probably okay in 2008.
So I wrote it
I
wrong.
saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Probably say his/her.
Yeah.
well, again, we're going back to 2000.
I know.
I know. Yeah.
Did they have computers back?
Especially since we actually had a female town manager, so.
Actually, and
What should it, manager to me isn't a gender. It
No,
is
but the
a,
word is.
Is it-
this is in here a few times.
Yeah, a million times, so
Yeah.
we should just
Well-
probably change that.
and that's where you don't even have to use he or her or they, you just say the manager.
Okay,
Yeah, remove gender. Okay, well pointed out. And then under section 2, where it defines the responsibilities, I don't see much to change there at this point.
well, we don't have enough information from the community or from those that are gonna come before us.
That's why I said at this point, Alan.
Yep.
okay, the one question I had in section 2 was, we added this section G in 2020.
Right.
Which had to do with hiring and appointing the Board of Assessor staff.
Mhm.
And the only question I had was, why did we only single out one elected board, not all the others?
Because that elected board agreed to do it,
To do what?
to allow the this to go through.
Oh,
I
see.
the assessors staff, the board of assessors, said we're okay with that.
Okay,
And
so that's an exception to the rule then
well,
in their case.
at the time, and I was on the board, I went to the different departments, elected departments, and I said, for purposes of continuity internally and workload, sharing workload, in other words, the town's got a major crisis, they need all the staff to work on this, where you can borrow people, so-called borrow from other departments. And I approached some boards categorically said, no way. And the Board of Assessors at that time, and she's now in Plymouth, you know who I'm talking about. She was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I get it. And so they were in agreement. And I think that's what helped facilitate.
The question is the current board still in agreement with this?
Well, it's passed. They have to be. It's now in act.
Technically, one of the voting members of the board is principal assessor.
Okay,
Valerie, who is the principal assessor, was elected as the assessor in the last election.
okay.
So I hope she's supportive of it. But one of the also reasons was that this happened just before then the reorganization into a finance department to allow for more coordination and oversight and shared resources.
And at that point, it was difficult to get membership. The Board of Assessors at some point, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that one of the offices was not filled. And instead of 3-member board, there were 2 members of the elected Board of Assessors that time. So, and they realized, okay, would be more effective internally.
Okay.
And as a part of the finance process now, you have treasurer collector, which is the same way. It used to be an elected position. That is now independent. That is no longer it's all under the financial process. So there's more harmony. They're all working together in sync instead of this department, that department.
So to your point, Alan, earlier, so here's an example where an elected board agreed to allow the town manager to hire someone. If the other boards were to agree with that,
What if a board doesn't agree and they're elected by the community?
Yeah.
I believe they're independent,
right,
but honestly,
when I'm,
why don't you instead, if it's the opinion of the majority here that, and with input from all our various sources, that should change, maybe I'll change my mind. But as it is right now, no. I think when they're elected, they have independence from other government here.
Yeah.
Unless they're doing their job inappropriately, there's a method to remove those people who are elected. And I'm just saying, that's what I think needs to be done.
but here, all I'm trying to ask is, in this case, the elected officials abdicated their responsibility for hiring. And is that the same, in your view, as having the town people agree with should the town have agreed that it's okay for the assessors to abdicate that responsibility?
I don't think I need to make an opinion on it. Ask me what's the best stock to invest in. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't think it has relevance. No offense.
Well, but what if we went to the library trustees and said to the library trustees?
Sounds like it's the Board of Health that.
No, it's multiple.
Okay.
And I go on statement again, I did address the elected boards. And my position, one of my arguments back, when somebody said, well, I said, well, the Board of Selectmen relinquished their authority for better efficiency to a town manager.
Okay, so.
That was my whole position. And at that time, the Board of Assessors, well, we'll look at it. All the others said no. Well, with the exception of one other, most of them said no.
That's what I'm saying. The document should have clarity, and if the citizens vote for a change that you 3 may be advocating for, then I guess that's what it will be. But until then, I have a
Okay.
different perception of
Okay.
what it means to be elected to a board. And if you were in a lesser board, I can't imagine that you would allow what someone else perceives to be a more authoritative board to somehow make decisions with those people that you retained or that report to you. That's just my perception of you.
Okay. It's wrong, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I like your perception, but yeah, okay. So let's go back to section 2. Is there any further comment to the language? I think all the comments are very valid.
So in paragraph C, the one that's about fixing compensation, does that need to be done in collaboration with the personnel board?
That is a very good point.
That's valid, yeah.
Because the personnel board approves the compensation and classification plan, which then is the basis for our budgets.
So that should be inclusive in the language.
So should it say not just fixing the compensation, but establishing the classification of the employee? Is that important too?
So there's two things here just to point out. So the compensation classification plan, so the personnel board will review job description based on department heads' input needs, HR's review. I'll also provide comments, mainly because many of these job descriptions I've already written in the past and had experience, and then will provide that. But ultimately, it's the personnel board who then approves that job description and then ranks that job description on the classification schedule, saying this is a grade 8. An employee fitting on there is then going to be within this grade, but it's really set by the personnel board what that position is. Here, so when we think about fixing the compensation within the appropriate amounts of all town office employees under the jurisdiction of the board. One, this is specific about departments under the Board of Selectmen. The second is that it really doesn't recognize that we've moved to this other classification plan process. So how that comes into play is really a good question. And that may be one of those things that we also look at some examples on how other towns have dealt with the wording of that, because in section 4, it also talks about then budgetary and financial items in that larger section. It's like we need to address it in both places. This could basically just say, from a global perspective, town manager sets the appropriation under the jurisdiction of the board, but then it's exercised through working with the HR department, personnel board for classification plans and all these things.
Would you put something right in accordance with the personnel bylaw?
It could,
Yeah, it's simple.
Exactly.
Keep it simple. Yeah,
because the personnel
that's what I wrote down.
bylaw and procedures manual really is on the implementation of that city things to follow.
And this is very comprehensive, very so.
The only challenge is that, and this is one of the fun things, is that we don't have elected boards deviating from the compensation and classification plan. They all participate together, Board of Health, Planning Board, Library Trustees, Recreation, on the implementation of that. But per your sort of line of reasoning, Alan, there's nothing that really prevents someone from saying, we're blowing this thing out of the water, we're seeking this, we're going to go with a separate line item to change all the salaries within elected department, and we have that as an article. That's where the personnel board and making approvals and all that stuff, it then throws a bunch of chaos.
Only a recommendation from the personnel board, just like the FinCom. It's only a recommendation under our form of government.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that those separately elected boards have the authority unless somehow it's changed.
Change is the key word. Thank you. Yeah,
And I think one of the main things is that, there's a lot of respect within town for a coordinated approach. Doesn't mean there can't be chaos at some other point, but we have a lot of buy-in because I think a lot of people view that the organization as a whole wants to move forward in a unified direction.
My sense is that other members of this committee have some information that obviously I don't have that maybe might affect my opinion. But without knowing more specifics of why it's potentially an issue, I've just said what I think the reality is. It's
No,
recommendations, it's not controlling.
I will reiterate what I said earlier. If the executive offices of the town of Upton can relinquish authority through a town manager, why can't some other boards with their personnel? That's all. Okay. Joe, are we there? You all set?
Yeah, I'm all.
Okay, so anything else on section 2? Excuse me?
I said, not for me.
Oh, me either. Dick? No, good. Alan?
Nothing.
Okay, so we've covered that part of the agenda, and we have any other topics not reasonably anticipated, which is a basic open caveat to address anything anyone else wants to bring up at this time.
And I just ask you to identify for the public when the next meeting will be.
Next meeting will be next week at 6 o'clock on the 7th. And the 14th, we will not be meeting because of conflict, and we will resume on the 21st of March. Our plan is to meet every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Excuse me, February, what'd I say? March? Yeah, I'm ahead of myself.
What time are we here on February 7th?
6 p.m.
Thank you.
Yep, it'll be 6 p.m. every Wednesday unless otherwise noted. Again, the agenda goes out, it's posted at the town clerk's office. Usually I get the agenda out within 2 days after the meeting, so she'll have it by Friday to post for next week. So well within the parameters of the law. So, anything else, gentlemen?
Just want to say thank you for your leadership.
Oh, that's so sincere.
No,
There being nothing else, I would accept the motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Unanimous? Okay, we are adjourning at 7:47.